tradition of Judaism. And so the parents said, we didn't know what to do. We don't know anything about Judaism, so we want to bring him to the synagogue. So I said, all right, So little by little, James started coming to like our Sunday school and religious school, and no pressure. And he could have left whenever he wanted, but he kind of liked it. And in addition, this family had kept their kids very connected to their native Ojibwe tradition. They have a Native American mentor in their lives. This boy, James, grew up, now he dances at powwows. And he has a Native American name, an Ojibwe name, and that name, it was, at the time, Fast as an Arrow. What a great name, Fast as an Arrow. So he was James and Fast as an Arrow, but he grew up in the synagogue and he thought it was time to get a Hebrew name, right? So we, in a beautiful ceremony, we named him Micah. The prophet Micah, we taught that we should, be humble and be faithful and act with justice. So he had three names. James, his everyday name, and Fast as an Arrow, his Native American name, and then Micah, his Hebrew name. And as he grew up, and again, never became formally Jewish in a conversion, right? He decided he wanted to have a bar mitzvah. Everyone know what a bar mitzvah is. A bar mitzvah in the Jewish tradition, when a young man or woman becomes 13, there's a ceremony of learning and taking ownership of the tradition. And it also is at that point where people are starting to, kind of emerge into adulthood. So James wanted a bar mitzvah. We had this awesome bar mitzvah for James. And at the same time, I noticed in the Ojibwe tradition, you get 4 different names in a lifetime, corresponding with the stages of your life. And it happened to be that at the time of his bar mitzvah was the time for him to get his new name. So at the bar mitzvah, his Native American mentor came up and did this awesome prayer and then dubbed James Naga Naga Bo, which means he who stands first. And then he was at his bar mitzvah, receiving his new native name. And I always think about that story when I think about names, and it also speaks to this interfaith and cultural sharing that you're so beautifully modeling in this church. And so we're going to talk a little bit about names, hopefully at the same time, educating ourselves about another faith, the Jewish faith. We consider ourselves brothers and sisters with one another, but we've got different ways of looking at the world and different spiritual motivations. And so that's what we're going to do. We're going to focus on 3 names that the Jewish people have taken on for themselves and maybe explore what those names signify from a Jewish and Christian perspective.
Yeah, no, as you're talking about names, just getting my spirit, just the sense that I know that we all come sometimes, even in the Christian community, at times when we need a new name. There might even be somebody among us who's come in this morning, I'm just guessing, that has a need for a new name. And as we explore these traditional names, I think even from a Jewish perspective, I think that God is going to speak to us about some new names that we might want to label ourselves before we leave today. Amen? Amen. Somebody need a new name out there?
Sometimes when we do retreats, especially with teenagers, we'll do that. At the end of the retreat, we'll say, did you receive a name during this experience? Something that happened that was funny or serious or beautiful or touching or transformative. Give yourself a name, And so, I think that's really certainly always possible to sort of give yourself a name. I worked for a long time at a summer camp, and my name was Dylan, because I like Bob Dylan. Some people say I look a little like Bob Dylan. Does everyone know who Bob Dylan is? I feel like, it's a whole generational thing. But so, there are people in this world that only know me as Dylan. They don't know Randy or Rabbi Randy. And I'll come across people and say, Dylan, you were my camp counselor. So, I like that name. Feel free to call me Dylan. So the first name, so all 3 of these names, these aren't only names, but these are 3 of the names that Jewish people are identified with or connected with. And all 3 of these names come from the Torah. From, just to make sure everyone's on the same page. What Christians often call the Old Testament, we don't call the Old Testament, right? Because, even though it is old, we don't think it's going to really be replaced by anything. But that's, so we call it the Hebrew Bible. In Hebrew, it's the Tanakh. If you want to speak Hebrew, you got to get that. That's good. Tanakh. You're converted. No, I'm just joking. Tanakh. And within the Tanakh, the first 5 books are called the Torah. And actually, a lot of people know that term Torah. It actually is a Hebrew word that in general means teachings. But the first 5 books are the Torah. And when you put the Torah in a scroll, the way it was in ancient days, you have, and every synagogue, how many people here have been to a synagogue? So, yeah, Cornell and Dietra, PD, were there with us. Thank you for coming to our synagogue. So, in every synagogue, there's an ark that sort of mirrors the ancient ark. And in the ark is a Torah scroll, right, which contains the first, in Hebrew, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible, what Christians call the Old Testament. So these 3 names all come from the Torah. And the first one is Ivri. All right? Now, Ivri means Hebrew. And you might have heard Jewish people referred to as the Hebrew people. Right? Hebrew is obviously a language, but it also is a name that we're known collectively as Hebrew. It used to be more common in America than it is now, but it is one of our names. And Ivri comes from someone who's identified with Christianity and Islam and Judaism, known as the father of those monotheistic faiths. Who are we talking about? Abraham. Right? Abraham. In Hebrew, Abraham's name was Avram. So Avram is Ivri. And Ivri means boundary crosser. Boundary crosser, isn't that great? Because, what did Abraham do? He left his home and everything he knew, and he went, because he heard the word of God, and he and his wife Sarah just left, and people didn't do this that much in ancient days, just trekked away to find their true selves and their new land. So Abraham was the first boundary crosser. He was a Hebrew.
Yeah, and when I think about the Christian tradition, and I think about Jesus, and I think about some of these stories of Jesus, that's exactly what Jesus did. This whole idea that God was inviting us, in terms of these names, to be a boundary crosser. That's why we were asking earlier about what kind of subversive practices do you have in your life? In what ways are you giving God space so that God can initiate you, push you to be that boundary crosser?
And so, what does it mean in terms of who we are as a Jewish people today? We are boundary crossers. There are Jews, and some people know it, some people don't, in many, many, many nations, right? From Asia to Africa to obviously North America and Europe. There are Jewish people who are both part of their larger culture, but also have this Jewish identity. And so, you'll see Jews of every race and in many cultures, in many lands. We've become, through the years, there was this diaspora where, the Hebrew people had to leave, just like Abraham, leave the land of Canaan, Israel, for a while, even though some returned. Many of us stayed spread out. And we became the boundary crossers, and so you can't, there's not just one Jewish culture, or one Jewish race, or one Jewish nation. We're boundary crossers. And I think we've become, in a lot of these nations, we're both part of the country, and we also have a little bit of a distance from it too, and that gives us that prophetic role. If we see injustice, or we see something going on that's wrong, we have a little bit of distance to maybe try to stick our necks out and try to make the society better. Not that other people can't do that, but I think as boundary crossers, we're in a unique position.